Black CEO blocked at his own mansion gate minutes. Later, he owns the security firm. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Crybaby. The steel gates of the mansion loomed tall, black iron laced with gold trim. But what should have been an image of wealth and calm quickly became a theater of mockery. A blonde woman stepped forward, her manicured finger stabbing the air like a dagger. Her voice ripped through the quiet driveway. 4 uniformed security guards erupted in laughter, their blue shirts and black vests shaking as if this was the best joke they'd ever heard. One doubled over, slapping his thigh. Another clapped his hands. The echo of their amusement filled the entrance, loud and cruel. In the center of it all stood him, tall, broad, silent, a black man dressed in nothing more than a gray, sleeveless shirt and dark pants. His chest rose steady, his eyes locked straight ahead. He didn't flinch. He didn't break. He simply stood like stone, a living monument against humiliation. The contrast was brutal, their noise against his silence, their sneers against his composure. To them, he looked like an intruder, some nobody trying to get into a place he didn't belong. What they didn't know, what none of them even imagined, was that the mansion behind those gates wasn't just familiar to him. It was his. The woman took a step closer, heels clicking against the pavement, her face twisted with delight at the spectacle she thought she was creating. "Go on, say something, or are you too scared to speak?" The guards cackled again. One leaned to the other and muttered, "Probably just some lost gym rat." The group laughed harder. But he didn't move, not a muscle. His stillness unsettled even as they tried to convince themselves he was powerless. The driveway air tightened, a mix of arrogance and suppressed tension, like storm clouds just before lightning. And here's where I stop you for a moment. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now back to Marcus. Because Marcus, that's his name, wasn't just anyone being humiliated at his own gate. He was a man carrying history, years of being underestimated, decades of being told, "You don't belong." He'd heard the same tone at airports, hotels, showrooms. He'd seen the same smirk on faces that thought silence meant submission. And yet, here he was, standing tall at the gates of the estate he built, brick by brick, fortune by fortune. They saw only a body in plain clothes. They couldn't see the billions behind it. But they were about to. The woman's voice cracked the air again. "You'll never get past this gate." Her laughter mixed with theirs, a chorus of arrogance. Phones had not yet been raised. Passersby hadn't yet stopped. But that moment was coming. A moment when silence would turn into evidence, when arrogance would collapse under the weight of truth. And Marcus, still silent, still unmoved, waited. Because power, real power, never rushes. It waits. The laughter around him swelled, but Marcus remained unmoved. His silence wasn't weakness, it was calculation. The guard saw only a man in gym clothes, broad shoulders under a gray sleeveless shirt, dark pants hanging loose, sneakers scuffed from morning runs. No Rolex glinted on his wrist. No polished suit framed his figure. No chauffeur stood behind him. And that, in their eyes, was all the proof they needed. He didn't belong, but appearances leak. Behind those gates stood 20,000 square feet of marble, glass, and legacy. A mansion with fountains that stretched like veins across manicured lawns, a pool carved into the earth like sapphire, halls hung with commissioned art. To the laughing guards, it was just another rich man's house to protect. To Marcus, it was the empire he built, brick on brick, deal on deal, fight on fight. He could have walked up in a tailored Armani suit, flanked by assistants, identity flashing in every detail. But Marcus chose otherwise. He came as he was plain, unannounced, unadorned. Because sometimes silence is louder than spectacle, and sometimes the simplest clothes reveal the ugliest truths. The blonde woman tilted her head, mistaking his stillness for fear. "You're awfully quiet," she taunted, smirking. "What's wrong, lost your tongue?" The guards howled again, their laughter rolling across the driveway like thunder without rain. One pointed at Marcus's sneakers and sneered, "Man can't even afford decent shoes." Another chuckled, "Yeah, this guy ain't no owner. He's probably lost, or worse, squatting." Marcus didn't answer. He had heard it before. Different faces, same tone. At 25, He'd walked into a bank in a button-down and slacks, paperwork in hand, loan approved in principle. The manager looked at him, then at his clothes, and said the words he would never forget. Not the image we're looking for. They denied him that day. He built a company anyway. At 32, he stood in a hotel lobby with a valid reservation, told he didn't belong because he wasn't the type. He slept in his car that night. He bought the hotel chain 10 years later. Now, standing at his own gates, the cycle played again. Same judgment, same arrogance, same blindness. The woman's finger still hovered inches from his chest. The guards still chuckled, whispering insults under their breath, and Marcus still said nothing. Because every word spoken too soon would give them power. But silence, his silence wasn't absence. It was weight, heavy, unshakable, the kind of silence that bends the room without a single sound. The crowd outside the gates hadn't gathered yet. No phones were raised, not yet. But the first domino had been tipped. The moment arrogance met dignity, the stage was set. Marcus exhaled slowly, eyes steady, not in defiance, in patience. Because he knew what they didn't. Their laughter had an expiration date, and it was coming fast. The laughter began to fade into something sharper. The tallest guard, shoulders thick under his vest, stepped forward until his shadow cut across Marcus's chest. His boots thudded against the driveway like a warning drumbeat. "All right, that's far enough," he barked, planting his hand on the gate as if to seal it shut. "This is private property, no trespassing." The other guards closed in, forming a half circle, their postures shifting from casual mockery to staged authority. One unclipped the small radio at his shoulder, thumb hovering near the button. "Should I call this in?" he asked, smirking. "Not yet," the tall one muttered, eyes scanning Marcus up and down. "Let's see his story first." The blonde woman leaned against the fence, arms folded, watching like a queen amused by her court. "He doesn't have a story," she laughed. "He's lost. Or lying." Marcus didn't move. His calm unnerved them more than anger ever could. "Id," the tall guard demanded. His tone was clipped, official, the kind you hear at checkpoints where judgment hides behind procedure. "Name. Residence. Why are you here?" Marcus's gaze flicked to the badge pinned on the man's chest. T. Harris. He read it once, let it settle, then looked back up without saying a word. The guard's jaw tightened. "You deaf? Or just stupid?" The second guard chuckled under his breath. "Maybe both." The woman smirked wider. "Come on, don't waste time. He doesn't belong here." A third guard finally pressed his radio button. "Control, we may have a suspicious male at the north gate. Copy?" Static crackled, then a voice came through. "Copy. Need backup?" Marcus stayed still. The words rolled off him like rain on stone. Because this wasn't the first time he'd been sized up, written off, treated as a threat in a place he had every right to stand. He remembered an airport lounge 2 years ago, first-class ticket in hand, stopped by an attendant who insisted the seat wasn't his. He waited, silent. 10 minutes later, the staff realized their mistake. By then, half the lounge was staring. The memory burned, but it taught him something. Patience cuts deeper than protest. Now, patience steadied him again. The tall guard shifted closer, chest almost brushing Marcus's. "Last warning," he said, voice low but heavy. "Turn around. Walk away. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Marcus's breath came slow, deliberate. His silence wasn't compliance. It was pressure. The kind that builds until the other side cracks first. Behind the gates, the mansion stood quiet, windows reflecting the fading afternoon light. It was a fortress of glass and marble, but to the guards, it was just a backdrop. They had no idea the man they mocked had signed every deed, paid every bill, built every wall. The woman flicked her wrist dismissively. "This is ridiculous. He's wasting everyone's time. Just drag him off already." The second guard smirked, nodding at Marcus's arm. "Want me to move him?" "Not yet," Harris said again, though irritation colored his voice. "Let's see how long he keeps pretending." They thought silence was weakness. But silence, in Marcus's world, was the loudest sound of all. The circle closed tighter. Laughter drained into something meaner, rougher, like hyenas deciding whether to pounce. The tall guard Harris took one bold step forward. His hand hovered, then settled heavy on Marcus's shoulder. The grip wasn't violent, not yet, but it carried a message. "You're less, and I control this moment." "Time's up," Harris said flatly. Move along. The blonde woman clapped once, slow and mocking. Finally, get rid of him. Ugh. The other guards smirked, one leaning in with a grin. Thought he'd stand here all day, mute like a statue. Marcus didn't flinch. His frame was steady, muscles coiled under his plain shirt, but his breath was calm, his heartbeat measured. To anyone watching, he looked like a man carved from the driveway itself, anchored, unshakable. Harris's grip tightened. You hear me? Walk. Marcus slowly turned his head, his eyes locking onto Harris's face. There was no anger in them, no fear, just a stillness that unsettled more than any shout could have. You're wasting your time, another guard muttered. He's probably some squatter who wandered over from the wrong neighborhood. The woman sneered, her perfume cloud drifting as she leaned closer. Or maybe a delivery guy who thinks a gate makes him important. The insults ricocheted like stones against steel, but Marcus remained unmoved. He had learned long ago that silence carries weight. In boardrooms, silence forced billionaires to speak first. In negotiations, silence unsettled rivals until they revealed their weakness. And here, at the gates of his own mansion, silence turned arrogance into overreach. Harris gave Marcus's shoulder a shove, not enough to move him, but enough to test. Marcus's body didn't budge. It was like trying to push a wall. You deaf? Harris barked louder now, frustration seeping in. Marcus blinked once, slow. His voice stayed locked behind closed lips. And that was when the balance shifted, though the guards couldn't see it yet. Every second Marcus remained silent. Every insult he let slide past, the weight of the moment grew heavier. The driveway air thickened. The mansion loomed behind him, not just stone and glass, but a silent witness. The blonde woman rolled her eyes, mistaking composure for weakness. Pathetic. He won't even defend himself. How? But Harris's fingers twitched against Marcus's shoulder, a hesitation he couldn't explain. The man beneath his hand wasn't resisting like a cornered intruder. He was standing like someone who owned the ground they walked on. Marcus inhaled, slow and steady, the kind of breath that signals nothing and everything at once. The silence was beginning to speak louder than their words. The driveway was no longer empty. A jogger slowed to a halt on the sidewalk, earbuds dangling, his brow furrowed as he watched the scene unfold. Behind him, a woman walking her dog tugged the leash and stopped, eyes narrowing at the sight of 4 guards circling one man in plain clothes. What's going on? The jogger muttered, pulling out his phone. He didn't put it away again. The blonde woman noticed him and raised her chin proudly, as if eager to perform. Just keeping out a trespasser, she called out, her voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. The jogger frowned. Doesn't look like he's doing anything. That's the point, Harris snapped, still gripping Marcus's shoulder. He won't answer questions, won't leave. Suspicious. The woman with the dog shifted uneasily. He doesn't seem dangerous. He's just standing there. By now, 2 teenagers on bicycles had stopped near the curb, phones out, recording from a distance. One whispered, "This is going viral." The guards noticed the growing eyes on them. Their smirks thinned, but their pride refused to loosen. Harris barked louder, more for the audience than for Marcus. "This is private property. He doesn't belong here." The jogger tilted his phone higher, capturing every word. Marcus still hadn't spoken. His silence carried across the crowd now, a contrast so sharp it made Harris's aggression look louder, harsher, unnecessary. The blonde woman jabbed her finger toward Marcus's chest again, voice dripping with scorn. "He's nothing but a fraud, pretending to be someone he's not. Look at him, cheap shoes, no driver, no class. You think men like him own houses like this?" The teenagers gasped softly, one whispering, "She really said that?" Their cameras didn't waver. The woman with the dog folded her arms, shifting to stand closer. "How do you know he doesn't belong?" she asked, her voice steady. "Because I live here," the blonde snapped back. "I know who belongs and who doesn't," the jogger muttered. "That's not how gates work." He kept filming. Harris's grip on Marcus tightened, frustration simmering. "Sir, if you don't leave right now, we'll have to—" But he cut himself short, realizing 6 phones were now raised. A delivery driver had pulled over, window rolled down, camera pointed at the guards. Another neighbor across the street leaned against her fence, recording silently. The stage was shifting. What began as humiliation at a gate was turning into evidence, time-stamped and streaming into the world. Marcus exhaled again, slow, deliberate. Still no words. Still no resistance. His silence now wasn't just for him. It was for every lens pointed his way, every witness whose eyes were widening, every bystander whispering, "Why are they treating him like this?" The blonde folded her arms tighter, but the certainty in her smirk began to crack. The guards glanced at one another, uneasy. They had wanted an easy spectacle. Instead, they had walked into an audience they couldn't control. And Marcus? He remained rooted, still, silent, but no longer alone. The air at the gate had shifted. What began as a spectacle now felt heavier, charged. The phone's recording turned silence into evidence, and everyone in uniform knew it. But pride is stubborn, and arrogance rarely retreats without a fight. The blonde woman, lips curled in disdain, raised her voice even louder so the neighbors could hear. "He doesn't belong here. This is an elite community. You can't just wander in with cheap clothes and think you're somebody." Her words cracked through the air like glass shattering. A few bystanders exchanged glances, uncomfortable, their phones trembling slightly in their grip. Harris, still gripping Marcus's shoulder, forced a laugh, trying to mask his unease. "You hear that? She lives here. She knows. And you—" He pressed harder into Marcus's shoulder, his voice dripping with superiority. "You don't." The second guard stepped closer, smirking for the cameras as if performance could disguise prejudice. "Man, I've seen this trick before. Guys come up, act calm, pretend like they live here. Always ends the same." The jogger filming muttered under his breath, but loud enough for his recording to catch. "Ends the same because you make it the same." The guards ignored him. Marcus still didn't move. His silence, stretched this long, had begun to take on the weight of defiance. Every breath, every blink, was its own statement. He wasn't refusing to comply, he was refusing to surrender dignity. The blonde woman leaned in close, her perfume heavy, her voice sharp. "You don't fool me. Men like you don't own gates like this. You clean them. You beg to get inside." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. One of the teenagers lowered his phone for half a second, stunned, then raised it again with shaking hands. "She really said that," he whispered, his voice captured forever on the recording. The woman with the dog stepped forward, unable to stay silent any longer. "That's enough," she said firmly. "You can't talk to him like that. You don't even know who he is." But Harris sneered, puffing up his chest. "Lady, we know exactly what's happening. We're doing our job." "Your job," she shot back, "is to protect residents, not harass them." The moment hung in the air. The guards weren't laughing anymore. Their arrogance had hardened into something colder, a determination not to be proven wrong in front of strangers. Harris shoved Marcus's shoulder again, harder this time. Not a push to move him, but a test, a public attempt to make him yield. Marcus didn't. The crowd gasped softly. Phones shook but didn't lower. Every lens was locked on the silent man who stood unshaken against insult, shove, and arrogance. And in that silence, something began to shift not just in the crowd, but in the guards themselves. Because nothing unnerves arrogance faster than the realization that the world is watching. The crowd pressed closer to the gates now, drawn by the tension like moths to flame. Phones hovered high, capturing every breath, every insult, every shove. The blonde woman still smirked, though the crack in her certainty showed with every glance toward the recording lenses. Marcus finally moved, slowly, deliberately. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, not with haste, not in panic, but with the gravity of a man making a decision. One swipe, one tap. He lifted the phone to his ear. His voice, when it came, was quiet. But in the silence that had built like storm clouds, quiet carried like thunder. "It's me," he said. "Activate the protocol." The words fell heavy. Harris blinked, uncertain. The other guards exchanged quick glances. The blonde woman barked a laugh, shrill and desperate. "What protocol? Calling for backup? You think you scare us with a phone call?" But Marcus lowered the device slowly, his eyes cutting straight through her. And then he spoke, his first words to them since the humiliation began. "This is my house." The sentence sliced the air. Simple, direct, unshakable. Harris scoffed, but the sound was thin. "Your house? Right. And I'm the mayor." His laugh rang hollow, but Marcus didn't waver. "I am Marcus Hale, owner of this mansion, and more than that, your entire security company answers to me." The words detonated like a charge. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Phones shook as people whispered, "Did you hear that? He owns the company?" The blonde woman's smile evaporated. her hand dropping from its confident perch on the fence. "You're lying," she hissed. "You're nothing." But her voice cracked. The teenagers on bikes looked at each other, eyes wide, muttering into their stream, "Bro, this is insane. He's the boss." The woman with the dog's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "I told you he belonged here." The guards faltered. Harris's grip loosened on Marcus's shoulder without him realizing. The second guard lowered his radio, suddenly unsure whether the voice on the other end could actually be his boss's boss. Marcus took a step forward, not aggressive, not rushed, but with the calm certainty of a man reclaiming what was his. His voice stayed even, steady, carrying weight no shove could dislodge. "You called me a fraud," he said, his words sharp enough to cut steel. "In front of my house, at the gates I own, wearing uniforms that my money pays for." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the birds in the trees seemed to pause. The blonde's bravado cracked completely. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Harris dropped his hand entirely, suddenly aware of how many cameras were pointed at him, how damning his every shove had just become. Marcus's gaze swept the half-circle of guards, then the woman who had mocked him. "You mistook plain clothes for weakness. You mistook silence for submission. That," he said, each word deliberate, "was your last mistake." Phones tilted closer, catching every syllable, every flicker of expression. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore, they were witnessing. And for the first time since the confrontation began, it was the guards who looked like intruders. The silence after Marcus's words was a silence no one could ignore. It wasn't empty, it was charged, alive, heavy enough to press into every chest on that driveway. Then the crowd erupted, not in cheers, not yet, but in gasps and whispers sharp enough to cut the guards where they stood. "He owns the company? He really said that, did you hear? Look at his face, he's not bluffing." Phones zoomed closer. The jogger whispered into his mic, "This is history. They just shoved the man who signs their paychecks." The woman with the dog stood taller, her voice clear now. "I told you, he belongs here, more than any of you." Harris's hand, once firm on Marcus's shoulder, now hovered uselessly at his side. His eyes darted between the cameras, the crowd, and the man he had just tried to muscle out. His jaw tightened, but the color had drained from his face. The second guard lowered his radio completely, thumb frozen on the button. His smirk had vanished, replaced by the dawning horror of realization. The blonde woman stumbled for words, her once slick confidence unraveling thread by thread. He's lying. This is some kind of scam." But even she didn't sound convinced. Her eyes betrayed the panic her voice tried to hide. Marcus didn't have to speak again. The truth already lived in the silence. The teenagers on bikes turned their cameras toward themselves, breathless. "He just said he owns the company, the whole security firm." One grinned nervously. "They're done. They're literally done." The murmurs in the crowd shifted tone, no longer confusion, no longer doubt. It was outrage now, directed not at Marcus but at the guards. "You shoved him?" someone shouted. "In his own house?" Another voice chimed in. "You put your hands on the man who hired you. Are you insane?" The delivery driver leaned out of his truck window, shaking his head. "Man, y'all about to be unemployed on camera." The guards flinched, shoulders sagging as if the weight of every phone was heavier than any badge. And Marcus? He remained still, centered, steady. His silence wasn't absence anymore. It was victory. The blonde tried one last attempt, voice brittle as glass. "If you really owned this place, you wouldn't dress like that." Marcus finally looked at her, not with anger, with pity. "Wealth doesn't need a costume," he said quietly, "but arrogance always does." Phones jerked upward, catching the line, capturing it for the internet's endless appetite. The crowd rippled with energy, half gasps, half murmurs of approval. The guards were shrinking now, visibly. Harris tried to square his shoulders, but it was too late. Authority had shifted. The ground beneath them belonged to Marcus, not metaphorically, but literally. The driveway wasn't theirs anymore. It never had been. The woman with the dog pulled out her phone, speaking directly into the camera. Remember this moment. They mocked him. They shoved him. And all along, he was the one paying their salaries. The balance had flipped completely. The guards weren't protectors anymore. They were trespassers in their own uniforms. And Marcus? He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to fight for space. Space bent around him naturally. Dignity had reclaimed its throne. Engines rumbled low as a black SUV rolled up the driveway. Its tinted windows reflected the shaken faces of the guards. The crowd's murmur hushed for a moment, anticipation hanging like static. The back door opened. A woman in a sharp suit stepped out, tablet in hand, heels clicking against the concrete with precision. Her voice was clear, clipped, efficient. "Mr. Hale, all documents are ready. Do you want to proceed?" Marcus didn't break eye contact with Harris. His voice, when it came, was steady. "Terminate their contracts. All of them. Effective immediately." The woman nodded once, tapping quickly on her screen. The guards blinked, unsure if they'd heard right. The second guard barked nervously. "You can't just—" But his words cut short when his radio beeped, then blinked red. He pressed the button. Nothing. Dead. Harris reached for his own badge, scanning it instinctively against the gate console. A sharp buzz. "Access denied." The sound carried like a gavel. His lips parted in disbelief. The blonde gasped, What's happening?" Marcus finally turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "What's happening is accountability." The assistant spoke again, loud enough for the phones to catch. "All credentials revoked. Security firm contract dissolved. Replacements will be on site within the hour." The crowd roared with whispers. "He really did it. They just lost everything right here." The teenagers on bikes cheered softly into their stream. "Live firing. You guys are seeing this. It's happening in real time." Harris's face flushed red. "This is illegal. You can't just—" Marcus's gaze cut him short. "I can. I just did." The woman with the dog smiled faintly, shaking her head. "Justice. Finally." The blonde tried one last desperate reach, her voice shrill. "You'll regret this. My husband's on the board." Marcus's silence made her words crumble midair. He didn't need to answer. The revocation already had. The guards looked small now, stripped of authority, uniforms hanging like costumes. Their earlier laughter felt absurd against the reality sinking into their bones. They weren't in control. They weren't even employed. The SUV door remained open, waiting for Marcus's next instruction. He spoke without raising his voice. "Escort them off the property, record everything, deliver the footage to corporate for audit." "Yes, sir," the assistant replied. The crowd's cameras followed every second as Harris, the once confident enforcer, was ushered away from the gate he had tried to guard against its true owner. His radio useless, his badge rejected, his authority dissolved. The blonde turned pale, her voice reduced to a whisper. I didn't know." Marcus finally looked at her, calm, certain. "You didn't care to know. That's worse." Phones trembled, catching the line, immortalizing it for millions who would soon watch. The driveway, once hostile, now felt like a courtroom, and Marcus had just delivered the verdict. The gate stood wide now, no longer a barrier but a frame, a stage for the man who had just reclaimed it all. The crowd that had gathered along the sidewalk leaned in, phones steady, every lens aimed at Marcus. The guards were gone, their radios silent, their badges useless. The blonde woman stood frozen, eyes downcast, her arrogance stripped bare. Marcus stepped forward, into the open space where minutes earlier he had been shoved and mocked. His presence filled the driveway, not with volume, not with violence, but with authority so quiet it demanded attention. He turned slightly, not just to the bystanders but to the cameras. His voice was measured, deliberate, carrying across the air with the clarity of a verdict. "You just witnessed what prejudice looks like, and you witnessed what dignity can do in silence." The jogger lowered his phone just enough to whisper, "Man, that gave me chills," Marcus continued, eyes sweeping the faces before him. They thought clothes defined worth. They thought silence meant weakness. They thought arrogance was power. He paused, letting the words settle. "But this house, this company, this life? I built them in silence. And silence doesn't mean surrender, it means strength waiting for its moment." The crowd murmured, nodding, some even clapping softly. The woman with the dog called out, "They humiliated you in front of your own home, and you never raised your voice." Marcus gave a faint nod. Because real power doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It acts. Phones shook as that line was captured, destined for millions of views. He turned once more, eyes locking on the blonde. "You said I didn't belong. Ask yourself, why did you?" Gasps rippled through the witnesses, a mic drop moment etched into the recordings forever. The blonde staggered back, face pale, her mouth opening but no words arriving. Marcus looked beyond her, past the crowd, into the cameras as if speaking directly to every viewer who would watch this scene unfold across the internet. Remember this. You don't measure a man by the clothes on his back or the silence in his throat. You measure him by what he's built, by what he carries, by how he stands when the world tries to push him down. The words landed heavy, undeniable. The driveway wasn't charged with tension anymore. It pulsed with respect. The SUV door closed softly as Marcus's assistant signaled everything was handled. Replacements would arrive soon, contracts already signed, the transition seamless. But none of that mattered as much as this moment, this victory, not of anger, but of composure. Marcus turned, walked calmly through the gates, and with a quiet click, they shut behind him. The crowd remained outside, buzzing, whispering, still recording. They had come expecting a spectacle. They left carrying a story. And across the screens of every phone raised that afternoon, a single truth blazed clear. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply stands, silent and unshakable.